and that's not great for a number of reasons, but one is just because heat sucks and it starts ruining things. Next question is from Forrest R, who says, ask GN, does the orientation of vapor chambers or heat pipes affect their ability to move energy? Since gravity is used to lift hot vapor and foul cooler condensation, it makes sense that they would be more effective when vertical, yet on most CPU coolers, the pipes are horizontal in a tower PC. Thoughts? Yeah, it's not a huge difference. We tested that ages ago. I don't know if I ever published those numbers, but I tested it back when I was trying to figure out, do we want to test air coolers on an open air bench horizontally or vertically, and does it need to be in a case or not? The conclusion was, for the most part, it doesn't matter. Some coolers care. It tends to matter more if they're much larger, because those things just kind of, the differences show more. Now, there are wicking materials inside of CPU coolers. We've got an animation showing some of this in our TLDR, how do coolers work. So there's actually, there is a, I don't know if I said liquid coolers, there is a liquid inside the heat pipe, let me clarify that, and that liquid goes through a wicking material. So hopefully those are the words I said a moment ago. But the wicking material is going to be sintered, it'll be weave, mesh, composite, one of those things. Composite's kind of a collection of things. Sintered is sort of like a copper powder that lines the inside of the heat pipe and helps with the vapor, the more or less steam that comes off when that liquid in the heat pipe evaporates, or I should say, well, yeah, evaporates is correct. So it evaporates, it goes up the heat pipe, and then orientation for this type of application doesn't matter a whole lot. Now, again, there are probably some really specific CPU coolers where you could prove that statement wrong, but I would have to test them specifically. In general, the answer is no, it doesn't matter. And back to the wicking material, the water vapor goes up the chamber, it hits the top where there's that crimped heat pipe. You'll notice it always comes to a crimped end. Condenses at that point because it's cooler up there, and comes back down. And because it's sort of a vacuum in there, the point at which the evaporation and the condensation happens within a heat pipe is much lower than it would happen in sort of an open real-world environment in a pot on your stove type of thing. So that's just because the way those pipes are sealed. And then the weave, mesh, sintered copper, composite materials help guide the steam rise and the condensation fall more so than orientation does, because it just kind of trickles through there. So that would be more or less the answer to that question. Cooling, by the way, is where I'm probably the most trained, so if you have more cooling questions, post them. Coalition Gaming, we got a couple left. Coalition Gaming says, and here I thought you guys were local to me, SoCal already, but I had no idea. Oh, this is in reference to last week. Anyway, what's your stance on using multiple AIO loops, GPU plus CPU AIO? How do you feel about expandable AIOs like AlphaCool, Ice Bear units, upcoming EVGA units, SwiftTech, EK Predator, etc.? I think it's nice. Expandable AIO market is growing. So first of all, first question, multiple AIOs I'm fine with, and I like using for ours because they're easy to deploy, they're easy to swap out, and we can get rid of them if needed and put something else in there. So we use those no problem. Next part of the question, expandable ones. I really like EK's sort of quick release system. It's solid. It doesn't really leak anything, and I'm not afraid of it breaking. AlphaCools terrifies me. We've had AlphaCool's Ice Bear sort of just explode with the spring popping out of the, because if you've had one, it's got sort of two screw points. Only one of them is really meant to be used, but because it's got 2 points where the valves screw together, there's 2 weak points in the system. And we've had that second point break before, and it doesn't leak a few drops. It leaks as much as you let it. So when it busts, you gotta hold it up in the air to make sure you're not losing fluid, and then hopefully you haven't lost enough that you have to refill the thing. But there are refill ports on the Ice Bear. Sort of a pain in the ass to do, but you could do it if you had to. So my opinion of that particular product is not very high. I did not like the way the quick release held together. It's not something I want in my computer. But EK's is good. EVGAs should be Ace Attack quick release, and I'm not sure how good those are because I haven't looked at a finalized version. I've only looked at pre-production. So I'll let you know when I get one. Is this the last? I think this is the last question. Al-Wakas Mahmoud says, hello Steve, TLDR. Oh yeah, this was a long question, so he's got 2 TLDRs at the top. Is it a good or bad idea to put thermal compound on one or both sides of a thermal pad for a laptop GPU die? Second question, thermal pad versus copper shim versus really viscous thermal compound. And then it gives us a deeper dive and says, opening up an older Toshiba laptop, did some cleaning, took the thing apart, and noticed that the CPU had thermal compound and the GPU had a thermal pad. Didn't have any thermal pads, so he tried to fill the space with thermal compound, and then the GPU was hitting 100 degrees Celsius. So I would imagine the reason that happened is because thermal compound tends to be thin and thermal pads tend to be a set thickness, and probably there was an air gap in there because you weren't making contact to the heat pipe. That would be my guess. As for what I would do, copper shims are always going to be the best. I had pause there to think about it, but I'm pretty confident in that they will generally always be the best if you can make it work. Copper is not a deformable material when it's in the form that we need it to be in to serve as a heat sink. So that means you've got a problem with the laptop because you've really only got so much space to play with and it's supposed to go back a certain way. So if copper doesn't work because it's not exactly the right size, then you give up on it. Don't try and force it and break all the stupid plastic stuff. That's terrible. The alternative, of course, is a thicker pad. Now, thermal pads, you want them to be as thin as possible because the interface is not great compared to copper. But it needs to be thick enough that when you put it between the units, it's contacting the heat sink and the die, and it compresses a bit so that you've got contact. I would suggest buying a really good thermal pad online. If you can find one, Arctic has some pretty basic 6 watts per meter Kelvin ones. If you can get them, there are 20 watt per meter Kelvin thermal pads out there. They're a bit more expensive and harder to find. And not really necessary, but it really improves your thermals if you care about that. And otherwise, 6 watts, not bad. I'd go for that and ditch the thermal compound idea just because it wasn't there before. So there's probably some kind of issue where it's not making contact. So that would be my thoughts on that. But as always, more questions. If you have them, leave them in the comment section below. I'll take them next week if we can get to them. There were a lot of really good ones last time. Sorry I can't get to them all, but we'll try. There is one question that keeps coming up about the sort of IPC equivalent of AMD GPUs and NVIDIA GPUs. Why is one clock higher than the other, but the lower clock is not performing better? That's a more complicated question. I spoke to Scott Wasson about it. He's at AMD now. He used to be at Tech Report, the editor-in-chief there formerly, and spoke to him at CES. He had an answer for me. I'm trying to get him on to basically talk with me on Skype, and we'll publish that video. It'll probably be an hour long or something. I don't have a time frame on that. I'm hoping sometime before Ryzen launches, but we'll see. So thank you for watching. Subscribe for more. Patreon.com/GamersNexus to help us out directly. GamersNexus.net to follow the news articles and things as we post them throughout the week if they don't hit the YouTube channel. I'll see you all next time. Revisiting the Kaby Lake CPUs to take a look at the more likely purchase for the majority of gamers, the Intel i5 7600K quad-core variant. We previously reviewed the i7 7700K and found the CPU to be largely uninspiring with regard to out-of-box performance gains in gaming, but did remark that its render gains were more meaningful. Now we're looking at the 7600K to see how the processor moves Intel's i5 series forward. Before getting to that, this content is brought to you by our Patreon backers. You can go to patreon.com/gamersnexus to help out directly. We just reached one of our goals and are producing some more interview content pieces, so check that out to help further. Running through the specs first, the Intel i5 7600K is what you would expect for an i5 CPU. It's 4 cores, 4 threads, no hyper-threading, and is using 14 nanometer process, but it is Intel's 14 nanometer plus process, which increases the fin height and widens the gate pitch. And as we discussed in the 7700K review, that improvement is really just what gets them a couple 100 megahertz extra out of the clock. So really the main gains for Kaby Lake over Skylake, just to cover it again, is going to be in the frequency department, other than some really specific things like 4K, Netflix, playback. Like other K SKU CPUs, the 7600K is fully overclockable and pairs best with the Z series motherboards. We've already detailed the new 200 series chipsets in our 7700K review. Again, click the link in the description below for more information on these chipsets. As for the 7600K specs, we have a base clock of 3.8 gigahertz and a turbo clock of 4.2. The cache is reduced 2 megabytes in total cache from the i7, dropping to 6 megabytes from 8. And otherwise, it's largely the same specs and compatibility. The biggest change, as always, is the halved thread count and reduced frequency from the i7 family. For details on the Kaby Lake architecture, check the link in the description below, because that's got all of the benchmarks in terms of the actual systems we use, the benches, defined in the methodology section. It changes, obviously, from one CPU to the next, because you've got to account for different memory compatibility, DDR4 over 3. And then the architecture itself is defined in the 7700K review. Won't be going over that again today, but we can go through the thermals, blender benchmarks, some synthetics, and then game benchmarks. Temperatures with our i5 7600K were a bit better than what we saw with the 7700K, depending on voltage, auto V4, things like that. That was all discussed in the motherboard reviews, by the way. But for now, what we're seeing is a 74C package temperature when under the same load that the 7700K was under with AVX workloads. Cores 0 through 3 were in the range of 67 to 74 Celsius. And then the power draw was rated at 97 to about 101 watts, or thereabouts. The core we keep at 1.288. It was manually tuned for these numbers. And then ambient was somewhere around 25, which is important to note as well. And just for what it's worth, the liquid temperature was 33 Celsius for the Kraken X62 that we used, which was a bit warmer than we saw with the 7700K, and that's just because the ambient was a bit increased during these tests, hence the value of our normal delta numbers. Using our in-house designed blender benchmark as built by GM's Andrew Coleman, we're recording a total render time on the CPU of approximately 68 minutes with the stock configuration, or 62.5 with the 4.7 gigahertz overclocked version. As this benchmark demonstrates, having the additional threads helps in render workloads, as the tool can render 2 times as many tiles simultaneously. The 7600K takes just under 30 minutes longer to render the scene than the stock 7700K, and is expectedly slower than all i7 CPUs on the bench, other than the A2600K. Compared to last generation's i5 6600K, the 7600K sees an improvement of approximately 5 to 6 minutes, or about 7%. Moving on to synthetics prior to game benchmarks, Cinebench testing places the i5 7600K between the i5 6600K and the i7 4790K, and that's with 716 CV marks for CPU performance and 184 marks for CPU performance. Comparatively, our overclock boost that up to 788 for total CPU performance, still below the 4790K, and 204 for single-threaded performance, or just below the 7700K at 5.1 gigahertz. The i5 6600K from last generation operated at 664 CV marks, or 172 single-threaded. For 3D Mark Firestrike and Time Spy tests, again, link in the description below has those if you want more synthetic. But now we can move on to game FPS benchmarks. For these, we have a mix of CPU-bound games and mixed workload games. Watch Dogs 2 is one to really pay attention to here, because the threads really matter in that game, as we just explained in one of our optimizations guides. And then Total War, of course, is interesting as well, because it is a CPU-bound title. We recently posted a Watch Dogs 2 CPU optimization guide for graphics settings, as the game has proven to be one of the few titles that takes advantage of additional threads from higher-end CPUs. The line dividing i7 and i5 CPUs here is clear, with i7 CPUs dating back to Devil's Canyon overtaking and outranking even the i5 7600K. Even with its overclocked 4.7 gigahertz configuration, we're still seeing it beaten by i7s for the most part. We're also seeing an average FPS of about 93 for the OC 7600K, with the lows tightly timed as shown with other CPUs. The non-overclocked version rests at 84 FPS average, and the Intel i7 7700K stock operates at 113 average. So we've got a gap of about 20 FPS between the two stock Kaby Lake CPUs. Looking at the previous generation, the i5 6600K operates at around 79 FPS average, so we're gaining approximately 5 to 6 FPS generationally. That's a gain of about 7%, which in this game anyway is sadly pretty good for this generation of Intel CPUs. For Battlefield 1, we're seeing the Intel 7600K stock land at around 141 FPS average, roughly equal to the 6700K i7 from last generation. To be fair, it's also roughly equal to the 7700K from this generation, which also caps around 141 FPS average. Compared to the i5 6600K, there's not a ton of improvement. We're moving from 137 average to 140.5, or a gain of about 2.5%, so not that exciting. We only start with a meaningful gap down to 30 but even that's not very relevant unless dying for 144 hurts gameplay. Total War has always been a CPU-intensive title, well, all of them really, and that continues to be shown with Total War Warhammer. As noted previously, the frame times have larger range in Total War than we're used to, so the 0.1% values aren't quite as valuable as normally just because it is a bit more variable in its performance. Overall, we're seeing large scalability over the generations of i5 CPUs in this benchmark, with the 7600K stock landing at 165 FPS average and the 6600K stock landing about 10 FPS below that. The i5 4690K from Devil's Canyon operates around 143 FPS average, so we're about a 10 FPS scaling to each one, with the 3570K at 99 FPS average. The scaling here shows that there would be a major benefit of upgrade for this particular title if moving up from Ivy Bridge or prior, but not so much excitement beyond that. The overclocked 7600K, by the way, shows that frequency matters with Total War, and it plants us at around 177 FPS average. Ashes of Singularity's CPU-focused benchmark provides a look at DX12 performance of a title that's well optimized for the new API. The 7600K stock performs just ahead of the 6600K and just below the 4790K i7 CPU. That's about the same as we've seen in terms of placement with the other games thus far. And moving to the overclocked variant of the 7600K, we're posting an FPS that is still below the 4790K, but it is getting a bit close with the next step up. As for overclocking, the 7700K that we worked with, both of them actually, were a lot more exciting than the 7600K. We were able to hit 5 to 5.1 gigahertz on the i7 variants of Kaby Lake, depending on which one we were working with. And that really wasn't that hard. We used a liquid cooler for it, of course, because it was kind of required at that point. But even using the same liquid cooler for this one, same methodology, same motherboard even, which was the Z270 Gaming Pro Carbon, we're still only hitting 4.7 gigahertz on the i5 7600K. With 1.4 volts, I was kind of able to get some stability with 4.8 gigahertz, but that was really pushing the voltage that I was comfortable with. And beyond that, you start running into some pretty serious temperature issues, and there was just stability issues all around. So 4.7 was the number we got with our particular sample of the 7600K, and ours was a retail sample. I bought it. So if that's worth noting, I guess it's out there. It was not provided, so it definitely wasn't handpicked or anything like that. The 7600K overall has about the same conclusion as the 7700K, which is if you own Skylake or Devil's Canyon or Haswell, there's really no reason to upgrade for the most part, especially for gaming. Now, if you're doing things like animations, like the Blender rendering, there might be a reason to upgrade, but gaming, not really. It's kind of a hard sell, even with the CPU-intensive titles like Total War. Watch Dogs i5 to i7 would get you a lot more than i5 to new i5. Other than that, if you're on something as old as Ivy Bridge or older than that, it's probably worth considering an upgrade. But again, at this point, I would say just wait around a bit. We'll see how Zen performs. Normally, we don't recommend waiting, but because Zen is so close and it's been on the radar for years at this point, might as well and see how it goes. At that point, it's worth looking at what the decision would be for an upgrade. But for now, no real reason if you're on Skylake, Haswell, Devil's Canyon, maybe Ivy Bridge, as we've come to expect with the Intel generational steps. So thank you for watching. As always, Patreon link in the post roll video to help us out directly, or patreon.com/gamersnexus. You can check out the full article with a couple of extra synthetics at gamersnexus.net or in the link in the description below. Subscribe for more. I'll see you all next time.
Core under attack by hostile forces.
Hey guys, it's Kyle Bennett with HardOCP. And a bunch of you reached out today after we did the delitting and relitting. We showed you yesterday, and everybody says, hey, why don't you run the chip naked and see exactly what kind of temps you get after that.